If an old photograph in a dusty attic could tell a story, what do you think it would tell? One summer afternoon in 2024 in the Martinez family archives in Napa Valley, researcher Rebecca Thornton finds a picture taken more than a century ago, July 5th, 1901. In the frame, the entire extended family smiles, but between them is a strange boy. No one knows his name. No one remembers. The photo was just a small mystery until Rebecca began to track down the child. Each file page, each old letter, each fading ink mark reveals a story of kindness, of loss, and of how people hold on to memories when the pain is too great to put into words. Tonight, as you listen, let the dim light of memory lead us back to California in 1901, where a seemingly ordinary family photograph conceals a story of love, silence, and a name nearly erased forever by time. September 3rd, 2024. The story begins quietly with a single woman and a house full of other people's remembered lives. Rebecca Martinez is 31, a genealogist from San Francisco who makes a living coaxing lost stories out of brittle papers and faded ink. She arrives at her late great-aunt's Victorian home in Napa Valley to settle in estate, and like someone opening a long-sealed letter, expects only the usual work of inventory and small goodbyes. Instead, she finds something that will nudge at the edges of everything the family believed about itself. A discovery that will peel back 100 years of careful certainty and reveal a secret that has slept in dust and cedar for far too long. Helen, Rebecca's great-aunt, had been the family's quiet archivist for as long as anyone could remember. Helen kept lists and ledgers, scrapbooks and boxes, a life lived in ink that stretched back to the 1850s, when the Martinez family first crossed into California from Mexico. Her house, built in 1889, had become a kind of living library rooms that smelled of lemon oil, and aged cabinets of letters filed by hand cedar chests filled with garments folded with the slow, respectful precision of someone who believes in memory as duty. Photographs lined albums with Helen's tiny exact captions, names, places, dates, each one a timestamp in a family's long, steady story of immigrant farmers who grew into wine growers and small-town proprietors in Napa Valley. Rebecca's work had taught her to read the spaces between facts. She spends her days with the damaged and incomplete, patching together family trees from stray birth records, reading handwriting that has almost forgotten how to form a name. That skill, that patient skepticism is what leads her now through rooms that smell of dust and orange wood, and into the attic. In Medione, the house's broad, echoing attic, she finds a trunk. It is not the meticulously labeled file-boxed material that Helen favored. This trunk looks as if time itself had misplaced it, a vessel closed in haste. Brass fittings clouded with a thin greenish tarnish, the lid exhaling a dry, musty breath when Rebecca lifts it. The linens inside are yellowed. The small household things fall into place as if a hand had last set them down and walked away. And then there are the photographs. These are not the formal portraits Helen lovingly arranged in her albums. They are casual, spare documents of ordinary life, laughing children on a lawn, a woman's hand resting on a picnic table, an uncle caught mid-sentence images that capture the warmth, the mess, the unposed truth that carefully curated archives often omit. Their dates range from the 1890s into the early years of the 20th century. For Rebecca, trained to notice what is missing as much as what is present, the contrast is startling. Helen's public record favored ceremony and careful order. This hidden chest contains the family's private, unguarded moments. One photograph arrests her more than the rest. On the back in ink, faded to a pale memory, someone has written July 4th, 1901. The image itself shows a large family gathering on the grounds of what Rebecca recognizes without needing to be told as the original Martinez farmhouse in Napa. About 15 people from stooped elders to barefoot children sit and stand around tables heavy with food. The light in the picture is uncanny, clear, honest, as if the sun had paused just to hold every face steady. The composition suggests a practiced hand behind the lens, perhaps a professional hired for the day, or a relative who knew exactly how to freeze a moment. And yet, Rebecca thinks as she turns the photograph between her fingers, this is precisely the kind of image Helen would have treasured and displayed. So why is it tucked away here among linens and forgotten receipts, rather than bound into the albums where names and dates are safe? Why would such a complete, carefully made record of a family celebration be exiled to obscurity? On September 4th, 2024, she spends the morning with that photograph under a magnifying glass and a steady lamp, cataloging its small details like a detective reading a face. She studies the clothes, the posture, the tiny hands at the edge of the frame, searching for the reason this perfect portrait found its way into a trunk and not into Helen's neat, public story. What could one image hide, and what quiet truth might it finally be trying to tell? The longer Rebecca studies the photograph, the more she feels caught between admiration and unease. The image is exquisite, technically perfect, historically rich, yet the question clings to her mind: why was it hidden? Why would a family so devoted to preserving its history conceal the single image that captured their brightest moment? The photograph itself is a window into another world. The Martinez family, at the height of their prosperity, gathered in the early years of their life in California. Behind them rises the old farmhouse, its late 1800s architecture, proud and elegant, framed by oak trees whose branches spill a soft pattern of shade over the lawn. The grass is trimmed, the soil rich, the air, at least as the image suggests, full of sunlight and laughter. It is a portrait of success of a family rooted in both heritage and new beginnings. Rebecca lingers on the details. The men wear light shirts, suspenders, and the best summer trousers, the kind worn for occasions that matter. The women's gowns are exquisite layers of lace and embroidery that whisper of patience and craft, still carrying traces of Mexican artistry, even as they echo the styles of the American Gilded Age. The children are dressed like small reflections of their parents' boys in pressed knickers and white shirts. Girls in miniature dresses with delicate hems and ribbons that seem almost too fine for play. Most everything about the composition feels deliberate. The elders. The family's foundation are seated in the center, faces softened by the years. Around them stand their grown children and their spouses, while the youngest generation clusters in front, some seated cross-legged in the grass, others balanced between laughter and stillness. Each face is visible, each connection traceable, a living map of lineage and belonging. The tables are crowded with food and abundance that seems to spill out of the photograph. Rebecca can almost smell the mixture of sweet tamales and roasted meats, see the rich sauces and the bright scatter of fruit and bread. There are dishes she recognizes from her own childhood, and others that belong purely to the past, a blending of Mexican heritage and American celebration of the old and the new coexisting under a summer sky. Whoever prepared that feast had done so with joy, perhaps with pride. But what holds her most is not the arrangement or the abundance, it is the faces. So many faces alive with unguarded joy. Unlike the stiff, unsmiling portraits common in that era, this photograph breathes. The people are laughing, talking, leaning toward one another. A little girl's curls catch the light. Someone just out of frame must have said something funny, because even the eldest patriarch seems to be fighting a smile. Whoever stood behind the camera must have known them, must have understood the rhythm of their warmth. Rebecca begins her analysis methodically, as she always does. She spreads out Helen's old albums beside her, comparing names, noting generations, matching the placement of each face to Helen's family trees. Piece by piece, the puzzle aligns. The couple in the center, unmistakably, Carlos and Maria Martinez, her great-great-great-grandparents, would have been in their 70s then. Around them are their children, Diego Martinez, Rebecca's own great-great-grandfather, and his siblings, their spouses, and their growing families. Every identification strengthens the sense of order of history, neatly preserved. Until it doesn't. She reaches the front row, a cluster of children seated cross-legged in the grass. Most are familiar. Their faces appear again and again in other photographs, their names inked in Helen's steady hand. But then Rebecca pauses. There between two of her known great-great-aunts sits a child she cannot place. The child looks perfectly at home, not a guest, not an outsider. They are seated comfortably, gazing directly at the camera, one small hand resting lightly on another child's shoulder. But no matter how many times Rebecca cross-references the image, flips through the family trees, or studies Helen's records, this child does not exist. No birth record, no baptism, no mention in letters or diaries. Not even a fleeting note in Helen's otherwise exhaustive documentation. It is as if a single person had been erased or perhaps never recorded at all. And as Rebecca stares into the faded eyes of that unknown child, she feels the faintest tremor of unease. Who were they? Why were they there that day? And could this be the reason? The photograph, perfect, joyful, and complete, had been hidden for more than a century. The child looks to be around 8 or 9 years old enough to hold a posture with intention, young enough for their smile to be unguarded. But what unsettles Rebecca most are the features. They don't fit. Not quite. The Martinez family faces are familiar to her. She has studied them for years. But this child's complexion, the shape of the eyes, the soft, ambiguous lineage written in the curve of the mouth. It all feels slightly out of rhythm. Still, everything else about the image insists upon belonging. The child sits not at the margins but directly among the other cousins, dressed as they are, smiling as they do. Whoever this was, they were meant to be there. That realization marks the first crack in what Rebecca once thought was an unbroken story. A small fissure that once noticed cannot be unseen. By the next morning, September 5th, 2024, her curiosity has hardened into obsession. The unidentified child has become more than a mystery. They are an invitation, a whisper from the past that refuses to quiet. Rebecca spends hours under the glow of her desk lamp, magnifying the image until each grain of film feels like a clue. She compares it against every photograph in Helen's vast collection, every notation, every cross-referenced family tree. The deeper she looks, the stranger it becomes. This was not a casual presence, not a neighbor who happened to wander into the frame. The child sits exactly where a family member would sit. Between two cousins Rebecca easily identifies from other records. Even the child's clothes match fine summer fabric, carefully pressed, stitched with the same attention given to the Martinez children's outfits. There's no sign of distinction or hierarchy. Whoever took the photograph, whoever arranged it, saw no difference between this child and the rest of the family. Rebecca studies the features again. There's something gentle in the face, but unfamiliar, perhaps a mixture of heritages, hints of Mexican native and European ancestry, all at once. In California at the turn of the century, such diversity wasn't rare, but the Martinez line, as recorded by Helen, had always been carefully mapped and specific. So how had this child found their way into the heart of the family, only to vanish from its history? She begins the search the way any genealogist would methodically, patiently through documents and ink. She checks Helen's family trees, which chart every known birth, every death, every marriage, and even the infants who never lived to see their first birthdays. Nothing. The archives are complete, thorough, impossibly thorough. There is no unaccounted for name, no entry that could belong to the child in the photograph. Rebecca moves next to the letters. Helen's correspondence stretches across decades, hundreds of pages, filled with the quiet poetry of everyday life births, weddings, visits, small illnesses, and celebrations. Families of that era wrote about everything. A new house, a neighbor's illness, the weather over the vineyards. But never, not once, does a letter mention a mysterious extra child living or visiting the Martinez household in 1901. That silence, Rebecca realizes, is not ordinary. It feels deliberate, as if a page has been torn out, not just from the record, but from memory itself. She considers the possibilities one by one, testing each against the evidence. Could the child have been a neighbor's son or daughter who joined in the photograph? By chance, perhaps? But would a stranger have been placed so centrally between two blood relatives in a formal family portrait? Unlikely. Could it have been the child of a servant, dressed for the occasion, invited as a kindness? The quality of clothing, the confidence of the pose, the comfort among the others, all argue against that too. And then comes the darker thought. What if the child was family, but later removed? A forgotten adoption, an illegitimate birth, a scandal tucked away under the weight of propriety. Rebecca knows how families work, how shame reshapes stories, how silence becomes inheritance. She flips through Helen's records again, almost hoping to find a smudge, a correction, any hint of an erased name. But Helen's penmanship is flawless calm, deliberate, unwavering. Every entry feels like stone. Another thought flickers through Rebecca's mind, softer but more haunting. Perhaps the child died soon after the photograph was taken, a tragedy too painful to recount. Though that seems impossible. Helen had documented every death, even those of infants barely given a name. If this child had been one of them, there would be something. A note, a date, a line of grief written in the margins. But there is nothing. The child in the photograph exists in only one moment, July 4th, 1901, perfectly alive, perfectly seen, and then gone. Rebecca leans back, the old photograph trembling slightly in her hands. Somewhere between the documented and the forgotten, a life has been cut out of the family story. And as night settles over the old Victorian house, she cannot help but wonder, was this omission born of loss or of choice? The longer Rebecca studies the photograph, the more she realizes that its technical perfection only deepens the mystery. The unknown child isn't a shadow at the edge of the frame accidentally caught by chance. They are meant to be there. Every detail confirms it. The light falls evenly across their face. Their placement among the cousins is exact, deliberate. Whoever took the photograph positioned them carefully, as though ensuring that this child too would be remembered. That realization troubles Rebecca more than she expects. Someone wanted this child to be seen, but then someone else later wanted them forgotten. By September 7, 2024, the question has grown too heavy for her to hold alone. Rebecca leaves the quiet of Helen's house and drives into Napa to the archives of the Napa County Historical Society, a stone building that smells of polished wood and old paper. Here's perhaps the silence in Helen's records might finally give way to a voice, even a faint one. She meets Dr. Patricia Chen, the Society's chief archivist, a woman whose grey-streaked hair and steady knowing manner remind Rebecca of Helen herself. Dr. Chen has spent decades tracing the tangled histories of Napa's early settlers, their migrations, marriages, feuds, and buried connections. When Rebecca mentions her great-aunt's name, recognition flickers immediately across the archivist's face. The Martinez family, Dr. Chen says softly, one of our earliest and most meticulous settlers. Together, they pore over the Society's files, immigration records from the 1850s, property deeds, vineyard maps, early photographs of harvests and festivals. Most of it aligns perfectly with Helen's work. The Martinez family's arrival from Mexico, their slow but steady rise from tenant farmers to prosperous vineyard owners. The paper trail is strong, clean, confident, until they reach the census records. Here the pattern wavers. The 1900 federal census, taken just a year before that fateful Independence Day photograph, lists more people in the Martinez household than Helen ever recorded. Notably, 2 children are marked not as sons or daughters, but as wards. No surnames are given beyond Martinez, and no clear relationship is noted. The 1910 census continues this inconsistency, household numbers that rise and fall without explanation. Dr. Chen leans closer to the page. It wasn't unusual, she explains. In early California, families often took in children without paperwork. Relatives' children, orphans, neighbors' kids. Mortality rates were high and communities depended on each other. Sometimes these arrangements lasted months, sometimes years. Rebecca listens, but her mind is already spinning. Wards, children taken in, but not claimed. Loved perhaps, but never recorded. She follows this new thread through the archives, reading through handwritten school rosters and faded attendance books from the small one-room schoolhouse that once served the Valley's ranch families. The records are simple, each line listing a name, an age, and occasional notes in an uneven hand. There, in a page dated 1901, 1902, she finds it. Thomas Martinez, age 9. The timing fits perfectly. The surname too. But there's something odd. The name appears only for that single year. No earlier record, no later continuation. A child who appeared and disappeared, just as the photograph had suggested. The notation beside his name is minimal. No parent listed, no household detail. Just Martinez, as though that alone explained everything. Rebecca sits in the still air of the archive, staring at the single name until it starts to blur. Could Thomas be the child in the photograph? The one seated between two cousins? The one Helen, never named? The age matches. The time frame matches. The expression, the posture, the sense of belonging, it all aligns too neatly to ignore. But why would Helen, who recorded every birth, every tragedy, erase him? Rebecca turns next to the local newspapers from 1901. Their columns printed in faded serif-type hum with the rhythm of small-town life, church socials, school performances, orchard sales, harvest festivals. Every family name echoes through them, including her own. One brief notice catches her eye in the July 5, 1901 edition of the Napa Register. Mr. and Mrs. Diego Martinez hosted a lively Independence Day gathering at their homestead yesterday. Family and friends enjoyed a fine meal and musical entertainment under the oaks. The event was captured by a traveling photographer passing through the valley. Rebecca exhales slowly. The photograph exists in words now, not just in image. The event happened exactly as she imagined. But nowhere in the text, nor in any later edition, is the mention of a visiting child, a ward, or a newcomer named Thomas. The silence deepens, more eloquent than any record. In the quiet of the archive, Rebecca runs her fingers over the rough page edges. The room smells faintly of dust and lemon polish. Somewhere beyond the open window, she can hear a lawnmower humming faintly in the modern Napa air. A child once stood among her ancestors, known to them, loved perhaps, and then erased so completely that only a single photograph and one school ledger remember his name. Rebecca closes her notebook. The world outside has shifted, but the photograph remains the same. Fixed, waiting, as though holding its secret just out of reach. Who was Thomas Martinez? Why did his memory fade from every record but one? And what could make a family, one so devoted to remembering, choose to forget? The newspaper article described the event as a grand celebration, a day when the Martinez family, their children, and their extended connections gathered beneath the July sun for laughter, food, and song. That phrase, extended connections, lingered in Rebecca's mind. It carried a quiet implication, a suggestion that not everyone in the photograph belonged by blood alone. Perhaps this child, the one no record seemed to claim, was part of those unspoken bonds that families once formed in silence and necessity. Dr. Chen, ever perceptive, noticed Rebecca's curiosity. She suggested another path to look, not into government documents, but into the quiet sanctuaries that had long kept their own kind of truth. The church, she said, softly remembered what the state forgot. And so, on September 9th, 2024, Rebecca found herself beneath the arched ceilings of St. Helena Catholic Church, the old mission that had watched over generations of Mexican settlers in the Napa Valley. Dust motes shimmered in the morning light as Father Miguel Rodriguez, the parish historian, led her into the archives. There, among the brittle pages, written in both Spanish and English, the breath of the past seemed almost alive. The ledgers documented births, baptisms, marriages, and sometimes the quiet transfer of children between families. As Father Rodriguez explained, the church had once served as the heart of immigrant life, arranging care for the orphaned, the abandoned, the forgotten. Some children were given homes through little more than a priest's blessing and a mother's promise. No paperwork, No witnesses, only faith and need. Rebecca turned a page and her hand paused. The ink had faded, but the name was clear enough to read: Tomas Miguel Santos, baptized 1892. A note beside it read that the infant was being raised by the Martinez family as their own. His mother, Elena Santos, was listed as deceased. No father recorded. A child taken in quietly, lovingly through the hands of the church. Rebecca exhaled slowly. After months of searching, here was the missing piece. Thomas Santos, a boy who by 1901 would have been about 9 years old. The same age as the unknown child standing in the old family photograph. At last, the mystery seemed to have found its answer. The child had a name, a history, a place within the family, if only for a brief moment in time. But then another record caught her eye. Its handwriting was smaller, more hurried, and the date, 1902. Tomas Miguel Santos died February 1902. Cause of death: influenza. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Just 8 months after that bright summer day, the boy was gone. The note beneath the entry read that he was buried in the Martinez family plot, mourned as a beloved son. Father Rodriguez's voice softened as he spoke. He told her that the epidemic that winter had taken many children, especially among the valley's immigrant families. There were pages upon pages of names, tiny lives extinguished in a single cruel season. Rebecca closed the ledger gently, her fingertips resting on the worn cover. The discovery that had begun as a puzzle now felt heavier, more human. The reason Helen had never mentioned the child was clear. The photograph taken in joy had been set aside, not from neglect, but from grief too deep to name. And so the boy in the picture, the one who had seemed lost to history, had never really been forgotten. He had been remembered quietly in the way families sometimes remember, through silence, through absence, through a single photograph hidden away in a box, waiting over a century to be found. Perhaps that's how history survives, not in grand stories, but in small mercies, waiting for someone like Rebecca to listen. The loss of Thomas so soon after that radiant summer gathering may have made the photograph too painful to display. What once captured laughter and sunlight had become a quiet wound, one the family could not bear to look upon. So the picture was tucked away, folded into time, resting in that forgotten trunk until Rebecca's hands brought it back to the light more than a century later. Haunted by the child's brief presence in the family story, Rebecca searches for traces of his mother, Elena Santos, hoping to understand how her life and loss led Thomas into the Martinez home. The church records paint a portrait of quiet hardship. Elena had been a young domestic worker serving local families across the Napa Valley. She died not long after giving birth, leaving her infant son without kin. The notation beside her name is simple, almost cold: no surviving family. Yet beneath that sparse remark lies the compassion of another, for it was the Martinez family who took the child in, described in the ledger as an act of Christian charity. What moves Rebecca most is how completely the family embraced him. Thomas appears in church rosters beside the Martinez children, baptized, confirmed, and listed in preparation for his first communion. In every record, his name stands with theirs, indistinguishable from the rest. Father Rodriguez explains that this was not unusual for the time. Formal adoptions were rare and expensive, but the church and community quietly filled that role, joining lives through faith and kindness rather than law. In that light, the photograph transforms. It is no longer just a frozen image of joy, but a testimony to generosity, compassion, and the fragile beauty of belonging. It may well be the only surviving image of Tomas Miguel Santos, a child whose short life left no official record, only love and a family that once made space for him beneath their own roof. Perhaps that is why the Martinez family placed him at the center of their Independence Day photograph, a silent declaration that he was one of them. Rebecca realizes that her discovery reaches far beyond identifying a single child. It reveals a legacy of empathy that ran quietly through her ancestry, a belief that family was not defined by blood, but by the willingness to love and to care for another soul in need. On September 11th, 2024, her research takes her deeper still, this time into the archives of the Napa County Health Department. There, among old ledgers filled with brittle pages and fading ink, she begins tracing the outline of an invisible disaster, the influenza epidemic of 1901 and 1902. Dr. Sarah Johnson, a public health historian, welcomes her with solemn expertise. She has studied this forgotten outbreak for years, an epidemic that swept through the Napa Valley, with silent cruelty touching nearly 1/3 of its people. The records describe February of 1902 as the deadliest month the county had ever known. Dr. Johnson's words bring the numbers to life. The immigrant communities, she explains, suffered the most. Families crowded together in small farmhouses. Medical care was scarce, and rest was a luxury few could afford during harvest. Even the strong and resilient fell to fever and exhaustion. Among the long lists of names, Rebecca finds the Martinez family again. Their losses were many, not only young Thomas, but 2 elderly relatives as well. Others, uncles, cousins, siblings, had been gravely ill but survived. Reading those records, Rebecca begins to understand the silence that had blanketed her family's history. The trunk had not hidden a secret of shame, it had hidden a memory too painful to retell. And yet, in that silence, a story endured, one of kindness, of endurance, and of how even forgotten lives can find their way back into the light when someone chooses to remember. The devastating reach of the 1901-1902 influenza epidemic left marks that were not only physical but emotional. Within the Martinez family, its concentrated impact created a silence that stretched across generations. The period that followed the 1901 photograph, once a symbol of joy and permanence, became shadowed by grief and quiet disarray. Rebecca learns from Dr. Johnson that families touched deeply by epidemic loss often responded in 2 opposite ways. Some became obsessive record keepers, writing, cataloging, and preserving every trace of the lives they'd lost, a desperate defense against oblivion. Others, unable to bear the pain, did the opposite. They practiced what Dr. Johnson calls protective, forgetting an instinctive act of survival in which painful memories were folded away. Photographs, hidden names, left unspoken. It was not neglect, but mercy, a way for the living to keep breathing. And within that silence, Thomas's memory slipped into shadow. Rebecca's further research into community records reveals that the Martinez family had not withdrawn from the world, even in grief. Instead, they turned their sorrow outward into service. Local newspaper archives describe Carlos Martinez organizing food distributions for quarantined families, and Maria Martinez tending to the children left orphaned by the epidemic. Their kindness toward young Thomas had not been an isolated act of compassion, but part of a larger belief that one family's strength could help sustain many. The records of the little schoolhouse that Thomas once attended tell a quieter story of disruption loss and endurance. Attendance registers show long gaps during the peak of the epidemic. Many names once written in steady ink vanish mid-year and never return. Among them, Thomas Martinez, the name the family gave him. Then, in March of 1902, Rebecca finds something far more personal, a letter written by her great-great-grandfather Diego Martinez to relatives in Mexico. The letter, fragile and yellowed, rests in one of Helen's boxes, overlooked until now. Its Spanish script trembles with grief. Mama, Papa, finally, we must tell you. We lost our dear Thomas. He was our son in everything except blood, and his death has broken our hearts as if he were our own. He died, surrounded by love, calling us Mama and Papa until the end. In that single passage, the weight of a century folds inward. The letter also describes how Thomas was laid to rest wearing a small silver cross, one that had belonged to Diego's father, engraved with the words Tomás Martínez querido hijo, beloved son. Rebecca sits in silence for a long time after reading it, realizing that the family had done more than mourn him. They had claimed him, fully giving him their name, their faith, and their love. And yet, in the years that followed, that love became too painful to display. The 1901 photograph, so radiant with life, was placed out of sight, not forgotten, but protected. By the time Rebecca returns to Helen's house on September 13th, 2024, she carries a different kind of understanding. She now sees the photograph not as a mystery, but as a memorial, a snapshot of completeness that existed for one fleeting summer before loss reshaped the family's world. She begins a careful search through the last of Helen's cabinets, seeking traces of the family's private mourning. In an old wooden file drawer, she finds them a thin bundle of condolence letters written in graceful early 20th century script. The envelopes are brittle with age, but the words within are still warm with compassion. Each letter bears witness to a grief that had been quietly endured and to the memory of a little boy whose short life had once illuminated an entire household. As Rebecca tracked down the Martinez family photograph, she began to understand that its multiple appearances were no accident. Some copies were kept as treasures framed and passed down through the generations, but others seemed to have become a burden of memory, hidden away or lost in silent moves. Morrison's files reveal that the Martinez family had invited him to take their picture several times between 1895 and 1905. But the 1901 4th of July shoot was different, larger, more formal, and perhaps the only time they wanted to capture the prosperity they had worked so hard to build. Morrison notes that young Thomas was a delight to participate in. There was no camera shyness, just a bright smile and a strange naturalness, as if he had belonged there all along. He described Thomas as a bright, likable child who enlivened the whole scene. Morrison's other photographs from this period show him often photographing immigrant families in Northern California, people who wanted to prove that they had found their place in the new land. The photographs were not just memories, but proof that they had succeeded, that their lives could be sent back to their homeland as affirmation. Perhaps that is why the Martinez photograph of 1901 is so significant. It is an immigrant family's recognition of achievement of belonging, of pride in belonging. Thomas's presence in the photograph, in a prominent position alongside his adoptive parents and siblings, proves that he was not a temporary child. He was part of them, an integral part. In September 2024, Rebecca reached out to the last of the Martinez family's elderly relatives, hoping that someone still remembered Tomas Miguel Santos, a child so beloved that his spirit seemed to linger. Only one responded, Roberto Martinez, 91, who lives in a Sacramento nursing home. He is Diego Martinez's youngest son and the only one left who can hear the stories firsthand from the generation who knew Thomas. When Rebecca mentioned the boy's name, the line went silent. Then a trembling voice said, "Ah, Thomas. Finally someone's asking about him." Roberto said that his father Diego used to talk about Thomas on quiet evenings when the oil lamps were about to burn out. He called Thomas the brightest child and said that losing him made him realize love knows no blood. But every time he mentioned the boy's name, he cried. So, the descendants learned to keep quiet. The family still had a strange tradition. Every year on the anniversary of Thomas's death, they would quietly go to the cemetery. No explanation, no name, just a family trip. Over the generations, the reason for the ritual was gradually forgotten, and eventually Thomas's name disappeared from the official family tree, remaining only in fragmented, whispered memories. When Rebecca visited, Roberto brought out a small wooden box that he had kept for more than half a century. Inside were a few items that had belonged to Thomas. A wooden horse, its surface worn smooth by a child's hand, carved by Diego Martinez for his 8th birthday, just a few months before he died. And then Rebecca saw a photo that had never appeared in the files. A picture taken in the garden of Thomas, laughing with other children. There was no ceremony, no formal pose. It was just a moment of joy, frozen in the summer sun of 1901. But what choked Rebecca was a neatly folded piece of paper, written in childish handwriting in broken English. The letter was addressed to Mama Maria and Papa Diego. She read softly, her voice almost breaking in the silence. "Thank you for letting me be your son. I am happy to live with you and my brothers and sisters. I will try to always be a good son. I love you very much. My son Thomas." A small letter, but the most vivid proof. It spoke for all that time. Silence and pain had obscured. Thomas was more than a guest in the Martinez household. He was truly their son by love, not by blood. That little letter, kept intact for more than a century, spoke for everything Diego and Maria Martinez could not put into words. It was proof of love, of gratitude, and of the invisible thread that bound them to the boy that fate had sent, Thomas. Roberto said that his father had shown him this letter one evening, long ago, when he was a bewildered teenager, searching for the meaning of the word family. Diego had said, "My son, blood does not make a family. Love and commitment do." But every time he mentioned Thomas, his eyes flashed with a deep sadness. The sadness of a father who had lost a child. The old objects, Roberto's broken stories, all helped Rebecca understand what the records and documents had not been able to clearly say for so long. Thomas was not forgotten out of shame or denial. He was hidden by a love so deep that the family could not bring themselves to speak of it again. That silence was not oblivion, but a form of protection, a way to preserve the memory without incurring further pain. Rebecca realized that her investigation had not only helped to decipher the identity of the child in the 1901 photograph, she had awakened a buried story, a piece of the Martinez family heart that had lain dormant for more than 100 years. Tomas Miguel Santos was no longer the unknown child. He had returned with his real name, with love, with everything his family had ever given him. On September 20th, 2024, Rebecca returned to Aunt Helen's old house. The oak dining table was covered with documents: the 1901 photograph, the baptismal certificate, the death certificate, the photographer Morrison's notes, the tear-stained letters, and the old wooden toy that Roberto had given her. Each piece was a piece, and together they told a complete story of a boy's 9 short years and of the undying love of an immigrant family in turn-of-the-century California. Rebecca looked at the old photograph one last time. Now she no longer saw the strange child in the corner of the frame. She saw Thomas, smiling brightly, surrounded by his siblings and relatives, all looking at him with loving eyes. There was no doubt Thomas was not just a witness to a family memory, but the soul of the photograph itself. This story, Rebecca understood, was more than just an adoption. It was a testament to the essence of kindness, that families are built not by blood, but by heart. Rebecca decided to rewrite the entire family history to give Thomas back the place he deserved. She compiled a dossier: birth certificate, school records, handwritten letters, photographic notes, and a death certificate that listed Thomas as beloved son in Martinez's grave. In it, she transcribed tremulous letters, innocent thanks, and diary entries that revealed the pain the family had hidden behind the smile in the photo. When Rebecca shared her discovery with relatives, the response was emotional. Distant relatives in Los Angeles sent back copies of the 1901 photo, attesting that it had been passed around as a symbol of pride. Another relative in Mexico sent old letters from Diego in which he bragged about Thomas's academic and musical talents. And then, in the summer of 2024, the entire Martinez family gathered in Napa Valley on Independence Day, exactly 123 years to the day after that photo was taken. Beneath the golden grapevines, they spread out the photos on the table and read the story Rebecca had restored. There were tears, hugs, and laughter mixed with sadness. At the family cemetery, a new headstone was erected. It read, Tomas Miguel Santos Martinez, beloved son, 1892-1902. The stone was simple, but the afternoon sunlight made the words glow, as if the boy's soul had finally been called by his true name. From now on, at every gathering, the Martinez family will take a moment for Thomas, the child whom love had received and time had hidden. The story ends not with sadness, but with peace. The 1901 photo, once an old mystery, has become a symbol of what every family yearns: to preserve unconditional love and memories that never die. Tomas Miguel Santos, the once forgotten child, is now back, not only in the Martinez family history, but in the hearts of all who believe that sometimes love is stronger than time.